to iTalk. In the following video, we will be showing you how to adjust or repair a drill mount or rimless type of frame. So here we have a pair of drill mounted frames, and sometimes called rimless. And most of these frames have an attachment where the temple pieces and the bridge is attached by two little holes drilled into the lens. Occasionally there's one hole, but the most common part is the two prong attachment. And in this case, one of the temple pieces has fallen off, and they are originally attached with a bushing piece. And the bushing piece or compression sleeve piece is a little piece of plastic with two plastic tubes attached to it that's gonna be threaded through the holes that were drilled inside the lens and then attached to the temple piece or bridge piece with these two little prongs here. And occasionally there's just one prong, which means there's just one plastic tube in the bushing. And occasionally it can also be a screw and a nut and bolt kind of attachment, which is metal. But in this case, this is the most common one. It's where it's a two-prong bushing piece that attaches the metal to the drill holes in the lens. So in this case, the temple piece has fallen off, and you can see there's no plastic material left inside the lens cavities. And in this case, the lens is still intact. There's no cracks or there's no lens material missing. So if the lens piece looks like this, it would be okay to reattach the temple piece. But if you have a lot of cracks in this area, or even if there's a piece of lens material missing, either in between the holes or in between the sides of the holes, it's typically not repairable. So the first thing you want to do is take a look at your temple piece that's come off. If you can see here, the two prongs still have some plastic material attached to them, which means that we are going to have to remove that material before we can replace the plastic bushing or compression sleeve and reattach it. So if you can see, the two metal prongs have some texture to them to make them stick inside the plastic. They're kind of like threads. So we're going to need to use a little pair of snippers to remove that plastic to start. So in the optical industry, the tool you'll be using is one of these tools. It's a specific piece of snippers, but you can use whatever you have at home. So what you're going to do is take the pliers or snippers to the plastic material, and you're just going to snip it off, just so that the metal prong is exposed. And you can see the difference here. I just took it off of this side, and you can see the little ribs there that make them stick into the plastic. So we're going to do the other side the same. And it's stuck on there pretty good because that's what actually holds it to the frame. So now that we've removed that part, this part is good to be reinserted. If you ever have any of the pieces come off your frame and one of these are missing, it looks kind of like that, it's unfortunately not going to be able to be reinserted into the frame. So if you have a pair of drill mounted glasses where when the temple is still attached to the lens, and it can kind of do one of these numbers, it can kind of swivel, that means that one of these little prongs are missing, and there's really nothing we can do about that. So that wouldn't be repairable. But in the case of this one, we can certainly reinsert that. So the holes are clear. The two prongs on the metal piece is clear. So what we're going to do is take a replacement piece, and it's what I showed you guys earlier, this plastic compression sleeve piece. And the way it gets reinserted is, if you see, it kind of looks like an upside down U. This part here, the solid part, is going to go on the inside of the lens, and the two little legs of the tubes is going to come out on the outside of the lens. Now, there are different sizes of these compression sleeves, and this isn't really a piece that you could pick up just anywhere, you know, at a hardware store or what have you. So this is really a piece that you're going to need to get from an optical store or have, you know, someone at an optical store replace for you. But if you do get a hold of one, this is how you would use it. So once the little compression sleeves are in, they need to be trimmed to size. They obviously can't stick out that much, but the reason why they do have some space there is not every lens is going to be the same thickness. In the case of this lens, we just have a very thin one. But if you have a thicker lens, you would need that length to accommodate for the lens thickness. So we are now going to go ahead and trim off the excess pieces. You want to leave about 1 millimeter of this little sleeve hanging out still, so that the temple piece, when you attach it, isn't too flush with the frame. A little trick that I use to make this a little bit easier to insert is I use a push pin, and I just open up the holes just a little bit. Try to widen them up so that kind of the mouth of the hole is a little bit easier to get the temple piece back in. Then of course you want to make sure that the temple piece goes on the correct side and that it isn't upside down. So you're going to align the 2 little prongs with the 2 little bushings. So you can kind of squeeze it in by hand a little bit. And once it's kind of stuck in there, in an optical place, there is a tool that looks like this. It has a side where it's flat with a little kind of divot in it. And it has one side where you have like a little kind of curved basket, almost looks like. And this basket can kind of swivel back and forth, and that little basket part is what's going to go on the back of the compression sleeve piece, kind of like so. And you always want to work from the top of the lens, because if you work from the bottom, then you might end up damaging the lens because it has more lens material in the bottom. So now you just want to give it a gentle squeeze and just make sure that the temple piece doesn't move, so that it's at a nice angle. And you want to give that a pretty hard squeeze, because this is what stabilizes the whole lens and the frame. So when you are finished, this is what it should look like. The little plastic compression sleeve or bushing is flat with the plastic side on the back, with no space in between. And you can see this is the front. It's nice and flush against the lens material, but you have a little part of that bushing still sticking out and cushioning in between the metal and the piece of lens. So in this case, this is now back together. But if you have one where you can kind of have this little wiggle, what you need to do is you need to tighten these parts. And if the compression sleeve or the bushing is still intact, what you can do is, again, use this tool. However, if you don't have this tool, a pair of needle nose pliers will work just fine to do this tightening. Just like a pair of regular snippers would replace my drill mount snippers. And basically what you want to do is, you don't want to scratch the lens or the frame, so just put a little piece of tissue in between. But you want to align yourself with the back of the compression sleeve and the front of the metal material, in this case of the bridge, and you want to give it a nice squeeze. Now you don't want to squeeze it extremely hard, because you could end up cracking the lens material. But if you give it a nice squeeze, and then when you get it back out, it doesn't really have any wiggle room, then you are back in business and it's tight enough to wear. And after doing this, you probably want to adjust the frame. The drill mount frames are really the hardest frames to adjust because they're kind of impossible to bench align. But you would just have to put it on, see if it sits straight. In this case, you see this is kind of not sitting flush against the bench, but that doesn't mean it's necessarily going to not sit straight on your face. So this is kind of a trial and error to adjust these things. This happens to be a hingeless model, so it's kind of even harder, but put it on, try it. If it's too high on one side versus the other, typically bending it the opposite way will account for that. So we have repaired the problem. In this case, it was just the temple piece that had fallen off. The temple piece itself, the metal piece, still had its two metal prongs intact, and the lens did not have any cracks or breaks in it. So we were able to put it back together, and now the frame is wearable again. So if you run into the part where a temple piece or a piece in the bridge is loose, and squeezing it back together with your needle nose pliers or your drill mount tool doesn't work because there may be some damage to the bushing, you would have to remove the bushing and replace it with a new one. The way to do that is with these snippers that I was showing you earlier, and this is where this flush, very kind of soft area comes into play. You can see it's rounded and it doesn't have any abrasive parts right here. That is so when you take it to the lens to remove the back of the compression sleeve or bushing, you don't end up scratching your lens. Now, if you're doing this at home, you know, a regular pair of kind of snippers will do the job as well. Just be very cautious of not touching them too firmly to the lens. So to replace one of these compression sleeves, you would snip off the back of the sleeve. So it'll just snip right off. And then what you end up with is the metal of the temple piece is exposed now, but there's no piece of plastic in between. And if you're at an optical place, what you will be using is this tool right here. In case you were ever wondering what this was for, this is what it's for. If you are at home and you just happen to find yourself with a extra bushing piece that you can use, occasionally they come with the frames, you can use a push pin to go ahead and push from the back and push this frame out just one at a time. Just push one and one. Just be careful not to scratch the lens. In this case, since I have this handy tool, I line it up with the two metal prongs. They match up with the metal part of the frame. Give it a squeeze and they are apart. And here you can see this still looks intact. Everything looks like it's in good shape. And again, now we're going to have to go ahead and remove the little plastic parts, part of the sleeve that is still attached to this metal piece. And once that is done, you just follow the exact same procedure as we just did to reinsert a new bushing and then squeeze this back together. Thank you for watching. If you like this video, please click like. If you have any comments or questions, please put them in the section below. Don't forget to follow us on Instagram and subscribe to this channel.